A new entrant in the highly competitive sovereign ratings market is ready to shake things up. Sovereign Africa Ratings is hoping to take on the likes of Moody's, Standard & Poor's and Fitch. The company recently appointed its first chief operating officer, and I've got him with me in studio, Mr. Zweli Maziya. Now, what will they be focusing on in this cutthroat industry? Well, he joins me now to answer that question and more. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Obviously, it's a new role that you have taken up, and it's been described by the ratings agency as an absolutely critical one, particularly in the place that Africa finds itself economically. What are some of the priorities that you're looking at when it comes to your role as the COO of SAR?
All right, so Sovereign Africa Ratings, we focus on the developing markets, particularly on the African continent. Our point of departure is to have credit ratings that are fair and unbiased, as well as independent. And we do this by focusing our methodology on the structural nature of the countries that we will be rating, as well as looking into the reforms that the countries are taking on, not only for the betterment of themselves, but also to improve their ability to meet their financial commitments.
One of the big ones that the other ratings agencies use, and you've just mentioned reform and other aspects to inform your methodology, is the country's debt levels and the way in which they manage that. I know that is something that has us in a negative light with the other big three, the global ones. Is that something that you will look at as a cause for concern when considering the health of a particular economy?
Of course. You see, when it comes to creditworthiness, it's very important to also consider the debt level that the country is in, and also just looking at the developing markets and the nature of these countries. It's also important to also consider each variable on its natural rate. For example, if you're looking at country A's GDP growth rate, it would be unfair to penalize it based on what that is, without considering the other variables that the country actually has in terms of its structures. So, for example, just to clarify on that, country A may have certain natural growth rates for certain variables. We need to consider the endowments, for example, of that country. And then in comparison to another country, you'd find that it's also operating at full employment. And therefore, it may have a different GDP growth rate. And based on comparison of the two countries, you'd find that the combination of the resources from one country to another differ. So that is something that has to be taken into account and not just focus on one variable, such as just the GDP growth rate, but we need to consider all the variables, and then from that point we can now give a fair assessment of the creditworthiness of that country.
Would you say that's probably one of the reasons that many in the past have called decisions that the likes of Fitch and S&P have made on emerging markets like South Africa unfair, in that they used kind of a blanket approach and not weighed each country on its unique merits as an economy?
Of course, and this actually brings me to the point whereby earlier this year, the African leaders actually revived talks on the establishment of a pan-African rating agency. President Macky Sall of Senegal and the current African Union's chair expressed some dissatisfaction on the systems that the international credit ratings use when rating African countries. However, this has been challenged by the Institute of Security Studies Southern Africa, and the leader of that institute, Lizel Low Vodran, actually indicated that independence will be one of the hurdles that such establishment of a rating agency will actually face. However, Sovereign Africa Ratings is an independent credit rating agency, so we are ready to give fair and independent credit ratings to the African countries which are our focus.
So African countries are the focus, but is there a potential for SAR to look at other emerging markets that not necessarily be in South Africa, in the African continent rather, but pose a lot of similarities like your Argentinas and so?
Of course, like I said earlier, our focus is the emerging markets. However, we want to prioritize Africa at first, and then as time goes, as we grow as well, we'll be focusing on other emerging markets, South America, in Asia, as well as India.
Don't you think it's going to be challenging, given that a lot of African governments have issues around transparency, when it comes to how a country or a state is run? Gathering that information, do you find that it might be a challenge, or are there means that you have developed as SAR to get the most out of a country in terms of research so that you can make informed ratings reviews?
Yes, when it comes to information and data, there is a challenge for a couple of countries, and we have planned for such a challenge. It's quite important for a rating agency to actually consider the availability of data before they can actually issue a rating. You'd find in certain instances that a country may not have certain information readily available due to challenges in actually gathering such information. And therefore, they may find themselves in a position whereby they don't want to actually get a rating or solicit one. And then some rating agencies would then do an unsolicited credit rating. However, our approach would be that if we don't have sufficient information, we will not issue a credit rating at all.
We've run out of time, but I have to ask you very briefly, are we going to see something coming out about South Africa soon from you guys?
Yes, we'll be issuing our first credit rating on South Africa in September.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And speaking there to Zweli Maziya, who's the new COO of the SAR. They're saying that we're going to see our first credit rating on South Africa in September.